The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Good evening. This is the People's View for December 5th, 2019. With me are my good friend Steve Negron and Don LeBrun. And I'm your host, Bill Ohm. We're all former state reps. Steve is looking to become a representative in Congress. And we wish you well for that endeavor, Steve. But our first topic of today is the topic that we talked about last week, which is the charter school money that the Nashville School District and perhaps the state of New Hampshire is having a problem with. Don, I can't imagine they not take money for charter schools. Right. What's going on here?
The money is there. The Democratic majority voted to table the issue, not to take the money, to table the issue. They claim there's strings attached. There are no strings attached. So my understanding is the fiscal committee is meeting next Friday, and they're going to bring the issue up again. What I've heard is that the Republicans are going to motion to take it off the table. The Democrats have two ways to go. They can either vote to take it off the table and discuss it, or they can kill the attempt to take it off the table and end it right there. It's all about envy, jealousy. Public schools cannot compete with the charter schools, and the Democrats are hell-bent on keeping those kids from getting a better education.
Isn't the truth that charter schools have better outcomes?
Absolutely.
And
ASD is number one in the state. The Micro Society is number 34 in the state. The closest thing we have is, as far as your regular public schools, is 84th.
Yeah.
You know, they're 50 behind the Micro Society.
And isn't it also true that in states that have a large number of charter schools, that the public school results have improved because they have to be more competitive?
Because they have to compete. As it is now, there is no competition.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I used to run a business, and I hated my competition because they made me work my butt off.
That's exactly
you sharpen your pencil and do things and be more efficient, find those things that were waste.
That's called capitalism.
Yes.
Right.
Market choice, parental control, all the good things that you think the public would want, but do the public officials want?
It's all about the unions. It's all about the unions. The Democrats, you know, there's a lot of them are very intelligent people. But when it comes to voting on issues, they're told how to vote. They vote in lockstep with the party. Mm-hmm. They don't think for themselves. And that's an absolute fact.
Well, Steve, you're a congressional candidate. What's going on in D.C. about this kind of stuff?
Well, you know, I mean, we see this, what's happening in our state is a small microcosm of what's happening at the federal level. You know, everybody is singing from one sheet of music. They're told what note to sing, when to sing, how to sing it. And so there's no original thought. But back to Don's point, you know, it'd be interesting to find out these people that are voting against this or tabling it, as you will, you know, have they reached out to parents, right? I mean, we sometimes forget that the parent has the biggest interest in a child's development, not the school, not the teachers, not the union, but the parents. And what you'll see sometimes is I believe that the school, and I've seen, you know, instances where a superintendent says, we know better what's for your child than you do. And I don't know where this country ever went to a point where my responsibility as a parent, I raised 3 children, well, my wife and I did, you know, that it was our responsibility to make sure that our children got the education that was best for them, you know, and not let an entity dictate to a parent what it is. So, and we had kids in private school. We had kids in parochial school. We had kids in public school. So my wife and I saw the entire gamut, right? What I found out is that those people that have a vested interest in their child's education, and it's a collaborative effort between the child, because the child has a responsibility in this as well.
Absolutely.
Right? The parent and then the school. It isn't one over the other. And anytime somebody starts dictating to a parent about school choice and where they can and can't go, I think they're going down a slippery slope.
Yeah, the whole thing about parental control is another related topic that came up in the papers this week. There's an editorial in the Union Leader about Nashville school privacy. And the subhead is Parents in the Dark on Gender Changes. And apparently, from what I read in this situation, is that the school board, the National School Board, feels that a minor's transgender and nonconforming status is an individual privacy right to be protected, and the parents are not to be informed of such a decision by their child in the school.
I'm not going to get into the transgender issue. That's a separate issue. But when it comes to raising a child, as long as there is no abuse of any kind with that child, which is a different issue,
Right.
the parent has the right to know every single thing that that child is involved in, what their thoughts are, how to teach them their values,
Right.
etc. It's all about the parents.
Right. So I see this as one more aspect of the approach of the state trying to take away the children
Sure.
from their parents. It's just
Absolutely.
chipping away at these little pieces of it.
And they may want to focus, but not to interrupt you, they want to focus it on this transgender issue. But look, these children are not emancipated, right? They're not on their own.
Yeah.
That's right.
They are not until they're 18, right? And so to be able to let a child dictate to a parent or let a system dictate to a parent goes back to my previous discussion. No way, no how is that going to happen on my watch, right? It doesn't happen that way. And so it's not, these people, we bring these kids home. They're our children. We raised them. We birthed them. We haven't given up our authority to do any of that. So, when it comes to teaching a child, you better have a parent involved, right? And as I used to tell my children, look, I'm a taxpayer. Like it or not, they work for you. A teacher works for the student. A teacher works for the parent. Nobody else is paying their salary but me, the taxpayer. And I tell you what, I'm going to hold them accountable. So don't you dare think that you can go off on your own and start dictating to me when you actually be holding me because I'm the taxpayer and I'm paying your salary.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you want your child to go to a total stranger and talk to them about whatever the issue is that they're having rather than coming to you?
Absolutely. And then you're not allowed to tell the parent that you had that conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah, that's the slippery slope of trying to indoctrinate kids outside of their parents'
That's right.
supervision.
You bet. You bet. And we see the net result of it. We see the net result of parents not being involved in the rearing of their children. Now, look, I'm not going to say it for all parents. Some parents abdicate their responsibility. And it's an 8-hour babysitting class. Go. Right. So there are parents that have to have, and be held accountable. But for the most part, the majority of the parents out there, they want the best education for their child, right? They want the best nurturing environment for their child. And it's a collaborative effort, right? And when you excise a parent from that day-to-day function of that child, I think you're doing a disservice. And we see what's happening in the net result in some of these situations we see in the world today.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a passionate topic of mine.
Hey, mine also.
Absolutely.
But the parent also wants the mentality of the child, the mental status of the child to be stable.
Absolutely.
And it can't be stable if there are secrets between
Correct.
individuals.
That's right.
Yeah, you ought to be able to confide in your parents.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, at the
Somebody
end of
who
the day,
really loves you and really is concerned about you and is not going to manipulate you.
Who better to take your issues to than your own parents?
that's right. Right. This teacher, and I don't want to denigrate teachers because my sister-in-law has been a teacher for 30 years. They're phenomenal people, and I believe at heart, they want to do the right thing. But sometimes, to your point, Don, they get told what to do. Right. That teacher has my child for 1 year. I have my child for their entire life.
That's right.
So I should have that kind of rights, and I still should have those rights to be the one that's determining how my child is being taught. Absolutely.
And in fairness to the teachers, and many times they're dealing with kids that have a drug issue at home.
Sure.
One of their parents is missing. Another one might be on drugs. So they really are needing some guidance. And the
Correct.
teacher has to step up and be a second parent or a missing parent in those
right.
kind of cases.
But that's a different issue.
And that's a different issue.
Right. I mean,
So
we
you
all
do-
had teachers in high school that we looked to, that one teacher that you would go to,
Oh,
right,
absolutely.
as a mentor, if you will.
But to restrict what the teacher can say back to the parent,
Right.
Little Johnny or little Susie here is saying stuff that disturbs me, Mom and Dad. So why don't we just sit down and talk a little bit about
Right.
it? And you can't do that?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's crazy.
Right. It is. Absolutely. I mean, you take one leg off of a 3-legged stool and it's gone.
That's right.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about some other hot air stuff that's come in the news lately. The front page of the Telegraph had issue on water quality. It says New Hampshire judge blocks new PFAS limits, stuff in the air and water that we know is not good for you, but it seems to be going to extremes with some of the regulations coming out of the state of New Hampshire. So I warn you guys, I want you to do a little experiment with me.
Sure.
So we're all going to take a deep breath.
Oh, I know that guy.
So what's the point of all that? Well, would you believe, and this is true, would you believe that there's a 50-50 chance in that breath that we each took, 50-50 chance that we inhaled at least one molecule from the last dying breath of Julius Caesar?
Could there be one in there from Cleopatra?
That would be a more interesting molecule. So the purpose of the silly experiment is, and you can prove this through simple chemistry and simple geometry. There's so many molecules in the breath you took, about 1 trillion. There's so many molecules in the air. Over 2,000 years, they all kind of mix and match, and they're floating around. So when you're talking about pollution, you can't say that, well, we got to eliminate everything that could be a problem, because you can't do that. There is crud everywhere. It's trace levels of crud. And the question is not, is there any crud, but is the crud of a level that's a concern? And this is where the science of all this comes in. Let me talk a little bit about biology, because how do we survive? I mean, remember, we were talking about the bubble boy. Remember the kid from Texas who was in a bubble? No immune system.
Right.
I mean, the kid couldn't survive without being truly in a sterile environment.
Right.
But the rest of us living in the real world, we've evolved to have certain defenses against the crud that's around us. You know, we have this immune system that looks for bad things, and it's very adaptable because, you know, when I was a little kid, I used to be worried about getting killed by some new bacteria that nobody's figured out yet. Well, it turns out your body's figured that out. It's got these T cells. When you see something that it doesn't like, so that's not part of you. I'm going to chew it up and see what's in there. And now that I know what's in there, I'm going to make antibodies for it. So we have this adaptive immune system for things like bacteria. We also have these mucous membranes, you know, while our kids are noses running all the time. Right. Well, we're flushing out all the crud that's in the air from our fellow students. And we have kidneys and liver to filter stuff in our blood. In our head, those of us who got some brains left, we have this blood-brain barrier. Now, it's not for bad thoughts. It's to keep the bad stuff in the blood from going across this barrier into your brain. So simple molecules like alcohol can pass through, but complex molecules that are, you know, typically bad for you or could be bad for you never get into the brain. They make it through your digestive system, through your liver and your kidneys, and get flushed out. So your body's evolved over time to be protective of small levels of crud. So now the question is on these standards is, are these levels of crud approaching the point where our bodies can't protect themselves from this? And that's where science comes in. So on these PFAS variations, there's a concern that, and I think we all agree that none of this is good for you. It's not good for you. But the question is it of a high enough level to be bad for you? Is there one molecule in that breath which is going to have no effect on us? Or is there some accumulating effect that could be a problem? So the purpose of science, and particularly the epidemiology of science, is to say, well, you know, bad things happen to people for reasons that are unpredictable. And so what you're looking for in any kind of pathology, any kind of disease, any kind of incidence, is, do you see something that sticks out of the background? Is there some area in New Hampshire that's contaminated, and all of a sudden we see some diseases that are coming out of this? That's red hot information. But if you don't have anything that sticks out of the background, then you got to be a little more suspect about whether this particular concern is high enough to merit some mitigation. So let's talk about these perfluorochemicals. Typically, the concentration of some of these chemicals is measured in parts per billion. You've got so many parts per billion of this, like parts per billion of lead in the water, parts per billion of sulfur in the air. But this stuff is not measured in parts per billion. It's so small, it's measured in parts per trillion. So when you see the numbers we're talking about, it's really 1,000 times smaller than the numbers you're hearing about for other pollutants. So the current standards for these pollutants are around 0.4 parts per billion or 400 parts per trillion. And in New Hampshire, we've knocked that down to be safe. We've knocked that down to a much lower level of 700 parts per trillion. And that's the lowest of any state in the country. And we don't seem to have any unusual problems at this level. But there's a bill that was passed and some regulations that were passed by the environmental folks that wanted to knock it down from 70 to 34, and then eventually through a administrative change without having a public hearing down to 12. Now, there's no evidence whatsoever that these trace levels of crud, this type of crud, has any effect on your health. There's no evidence. At high levels, yes, it does. At these microscopic levels, it's down with all the other crud that's in the atmosphere that we're breathing and drinking all the time. So the case went to court, and the water districts are facing $100 million of mitigation expense to reduce this level from 70 down to 12. And they're saying, wait a minute, $100 million? Is that the best use of our money? Isn't there something better we could do with that money instead of taking this non-proven problem and knock it down to a level that's way below what science says it has to be? So that's my concern.
But you can make numbers acceptable or unacceptable. You can keep changing numbers to state whatever you want. It's just like a political poll. You can ask questions in such a way that you'll get the answers you want.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing with anything. It's all about the numbers.
Yeah. Sometimes they say, well, we want this to be undetectable. Well, you get really good instruments. You can detect just about anything. So it's never a good answer to say it's undetectable. So now the numbers are, like 1,000 times below what the previous standard was, without any, or 100 times or 10 times, without any discussion as to whether that's scientifically based. I mean, it just bothers me that we have a huge amount of problems to solve in New Hampshire, health problems done. You run H&H Health and Human Services. We have many more problems than we have funds to deal with these problems.
Absolutely.
Do you want to take $100 million out of that pie on a problem that appears to be non-existent?
Absolutely not, because I think it's a much more basic problem. I think today's society, from the time a baby is born, everything is about, we have to be as sterile as possible. Years ago, the reason that kids didn't get affected by these things was because they were allowed to go out and play in a mud puddle. That builds up the immune system.
Very true.
As it is now with the push on sterility, the immune system never gets a chance to do that.
In fact, the only time you're truly sterile is when you're in the womb. Once the water breaks,
Right.
you get your first dose of bacteria being born, and
First
you need
breath of
that.
air.
You can't digest food until you have some of that bacteria in you. Another experiment. I'm going to stand up. I weigh about 180 pounds.
You need to go on a diet.
If I could lose all the bacteria in my body, I'd be down 10 pounds. We're carrying around 10 pounds of non-human DNA in our body, mainly through bacteria, that helps keep us alive, helps us digest food. It's,
I have to take your word for that. I'm not sure.
it might be 4 pounds, but it's somewhere in that area.
There's stuff in us.
There is stuff in it.
Or is it the weight that I was claiming to be?
No. So, Bill, back to your question. Have there been situations where somebody's identified like there's clusters of areas? Not the thing about, I think it was Cobain or the water treatment where they were just dumping a bunch of stuff.
Saint-Cobain,
Saint-Cobain.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about that, but in a broader area, have they definitively found that there's clusters of thumb things that's a result of these PFASs or PFOAs or any of that stuff? And so why the draconian move from 70 to 12, I guess is...
Yeah, I think there's some evidence of some bladder cancer in kids. in these high PFOA areas.
Sure.
And that absolutely needs work.
Right.
So you really need to watch what's happening, because that's got to have much higher levels
Right.
of PFOAs, and it has to be mitigated. We're not talking about parts per trillion, we're talking about parts per billion.
Right.
And they got to be, mitigated. So, but the worry is that you want to solve the problem and not oversolve the problem. And that's our discussion.
Sure.
How do you get it down to 70 and why do you want to get it down to 12? Is there any evidence that it makes any bit of difference?
Right. I mean, it's the old adage that perfect is the enemy of good enough,
Yes.
and so where are we? Certainly we want drinkable water, right?
Yes.
Potable water that keeps citizens healthy and safe. Clearly that's all we want, but how far is that, and where do you strike that balance? And I think sometimes people on a pendulum swing will go all the way to one side and all of a sudden drive, and all of a sudden now it's driving behavior,
Yeah.
and causing $100 million, demand to fix a problem.
Yeah, from scarce resources. Because Don, I remember you were the vice chair of HHS in a couple of terms, and that was a tough committee to have.
It was a good committee, though.
I mean,
It was a committee that dealt directly with the problems of our society,
Yeah.
the health problems of our society. And it never gets old, But getting back to what you said about the childhood cancer possibly from water,
Yeah.
how does that correlate with the fact that autism, from the day a child is born before they've ever had a taste of water, is on the rise, dramatically on the rise?
You have to ask, is that from the diagnostic methods? Have they changed? Or has the children changed?
That's a good question. I can't answer.
And I don't have that answer, but that's the kind of question you would ask. If you're an epidemiologist, you say, okay, there's bad things happen all the time. Now, is there any evidence that we can correlate some bad thing happening to something that's been done? And it's tough to do when you get these very small instances of something. We used to have big instances of problems with lead back in the day, in the 70s with leaded gas. You'd have 20...
Leaded gas, leaded paint.
Yeah, right, lead paint, yeah. You'd have, the typical blood lead level is about 20 micrograms per deciliter. Now it's down to 0.2. We've really done a great job in the environment through eliminating the lead in the environment through gasoline and the paint remediation. But even with lead now, there's some concern because at this level of, once you get down to about 2 or 3 micrograms, any toxicology effects disappear. It's certainly not good for you, but it's no longer bad for you. It's in part of that dirt that we all play around in. And, it's there, but it doesn't affect you. So there's always the push to, let's get all the lead out of drinking water. Well, it sounds good.
That's just one source.
Yeah.
There's other sources that are
For autism.
much more problematic than in water or paint or in gasoline. You can look at gun ranges. There's a huge lead problem in gun ranges. But the gun ranges know how to handle the problem.
Right.
But there's so many sources of lead.
Yeah. Well,
So many sources of asbestos.
Yeah, and
We've never gotten asbestos out of out of the atmosphere.
Well, talk about the atmospheric testing with the atomic bombs in the 1950s.
Yep.
You have Strontium 90. It's got a 30-year half-life. We're still got 1/4 of that lying on the ground. 60 years later.
I saw a documentary last night about how many times the radiation from Chernobyl has gone around the world.
Yeah. How many molecules did we just inhale from that?
Absolutely.
Right.
That explains a lot.
Sure.
That's why we have these glowing looks to us ourselves. Well, on a lighter note, we had this numbering controversy now about our highways in New Hampshire and how Big Brother seems to not like our numbering system for our highways. So we've got, when people ask me where I live in Nashua, it's exit 1,
Right.
We refer to our dwelling, our neighborhoods as the exit numbers on the highway. But now the feds want to change those numbers to something else, to be actual mile numbers and not the traditional numbers that we use to identify ourselves.
You've got mile markers.
We do.
Yeah, every 10th of a mile, you've got a mile marker.
Yeah.
Right. They're actually put in stone.
Yes,
You know.
absolutely.
So what do you think about the feds requiring us to change our signs on the highways saying exit 1 Spitbrook Road, exit 4.
Do we say
Hollis-
exit 10 now defunct, exit 11 now defunct, exit 12 now defunct?
Yeah. It just strikes me as silliness. What do you think,
I just
Steve?
don't understand why the government has to reach down into a state and mandate something. It's our roads, right? It's our exits. It's our state. Let us determine. It's just like people in New Jersey, right? If somebody says they're in New Jersey, the first question is, what exit off the turnpike? Right? I mean, because you go to Jersey and a turnpike, exit 1 to exit 2 may be 20 miles, right? It isn't like 1 to 2 here in New Hampshire or 3. So I'm just a proponent of get the government out of our business. Let the state be the state. We know best, right? And so I applaud Governor Sununu. He says he's an exit 3 kid from Salem, right?
We know where that is.
We do know where that is, absolutely.
What did the government do with cannabis? They said, let the states handle it.
Right.
There's a federal law says it's illegal. Let the states handle it.
Yeah,
So let the states handle the roads.
that's right. I just think it's, and we were talking earlier before we went on air, everybody uses some sort of mechanical GPS receiver, whether it's your phone
Right.
or it's a Garmin. It tells you where you're at. It would be nice to get a perspective of some of the guys that do this for a living, the on the road, over the road guys. Is that really going to make a difference for you? So I just think it's silly. They think it's helping us. I haven't been able to see what the value of that is. Something goes to the point of, this is who we are. Right.
Well, they're from the government and they're here to help, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's,
Yeah, they're-
what's the 2 biggest lies? We're here to help, and we're glad you're
I
here.
wish they wouldn't help so much.
Yeah, Governor Sununu points out that I think we're the state that puts the most amount of highway and gets the smallest percentage back of the highway funds.
Right. Right.
So
So that's why you need good congressional people down there to fight for the state. Oh, that's a different topic.
and I know a good candidate. Steve.
That's another reason why the government wants to give us $46 million for charter schools, that we should take it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right, so that wraps up our show for today. Hope you come and see us next time. This is The People's View. I'm your host, Bill Ohm. Take care.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.